Thanks everybody for joining us today. Just our kind of quick disclaimer. This presentation is for educational purposes only. It is not specific legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. We'll have some information at the end on contacting us if you have specific questions. Also, so you can get on with your day, I'm going to go through this information somewhat quickly. Let's start, of course, with the agenda. We're going to talk about what are policies and procedures. I mean, our presentation, come in, take a seat, let's go over the company's policies and procedures. So we want to talk about that specific part of it. We want to talk about how you create your policies and procedures, and we also want to talk about how you can get help with creating your policies and procedures. All right, big picture overview, 30,000 feet, all of those corporate speak cliches. We'll ask a fundamental question: what actually are policies and procedures? So generally speaking, that means guidelines and details on how your business is run. It's specifics getting down into the operations of the tasks that are performed within your organization. Sometimes a good way to define something is to say what it is not. So before we get into more details on what policies and procedures actually are, let's first, just to get everything clarified, talk about what they are not. So your policies and procedures are not your employee handbook. This is probably the most important takeaway from this presentation today. Your policies and procedures are not your employee handbook. An employee handbook is a very specific and important document for every organization. An employee handbook should only contain information addressing employment law related issues. It should be focused specifically on legal compliance. So what are some of the items in an employee handbook that are not policies and procedures? An anti-harassment policy would not be a policy and procedure for operational purposes. Also in the employee handbook, an anti-discrimination policy, equal employment opportunity information, information on use of company equipment, social media information, covering topics on deductions from pay, payroll information, timekeeping, wage and hour information. If you've got an electronic use policy, information on paid sick leave, family leave, if you have a vacation policy, information talking about your meal periods and break times. All of those subjects are not policies and procedures. Those are topics, again, relating to employment law. Those specific topics need to be covered in your employee handbook only. Second item that would not be considered part of the policies and procedures universe are benefits information, real specific benefits information. Your detailed benefits data for your employees, those are not policies and procedures. Information like what types of benefits you offer, who's eligible for those benefits, those pieces of information are not policies and procedures. They are specific benefits related information. In addition, your benefits information and description should not be in your employee handbook. Instead, if you've got information that you have to provide to employees regarding benefits, that should be provided in something known as a summary plan description, otherwise known as an SPD. And the SPD is given to employees as a separate standalone document that is not an employee handbook and is not a policy and procedure. Just as a side note, an SPD is required for each participant of all qualified benefit plans covered under ERISA. So if you think of qualified benefit plans under ERISA, you think of like employer provided health insurance, employer provided retirement benefits such as a 401k plan. If you're an employer that offers those types of benefits, again, that information should not be in an employee handbook. It should not be a policy and procedure, but it should be in an SPD. As an additional side note, if you need help with an SPD, we do offer those services. And again, we'll have some information on getting a hold of us at the end. And then regarding what are not policies and procedures, one of the topics that frequently comes up is safety information. Is it a policy and procedure? Is it not a policy and procedure? It's kind of a gray area. It might be a policy and procedure, it might not be. Some of that will depend on the industry that you're in. With different types of work, safety information could be a whole standalone category outside of your policies and procedures, or depending, it could be included in your policies and procedures, but we'll discuss more on that in a little bit. So, getting to the heart of the matter, what are policies and procedures? Basically, they're going to be overall guidelines on how your business is actually run and operated. They have policies and procedures provide detailed information on specific actions to be taken by your employees. And it's basically a policy and procedure, again, as opposed to an employee handbook or benefit information. A policy and procedure would spell out who does what, when they do it, where they do it, how they do it, and why they do it. Let's talk about an example. On a very simplified basis, we're going to do something basic that everybody can relate to in one way or another, and then that could be extended out depending on your business, your industry, to more complicated types of jobs. But let's just start with something everybody's familiar with, and that's a cashier position. So it could be somebody at a grocery store, it could be in a retail outlet, it could be a convenience store, a truck stop, it could be any type of place that employs a cashier. I guess when I was looking at this, I was thinking of maybe a convenience store. So I'm going to give some kind of straightforward ideas on policies and procedures for a retail cashier position. Your policy and procedures document for the job could have information on where to park, for example, when somebody comes to work. So it would be language along the lines of employees must park in the noted worker spaces on the north side of the store, something like that. There could be something on employee uniforms, for example. Employees must wear non-slip safety shoes and the blue uniform top provided by the company. There could be information on things like handling cash. Where is the cash drawer located? How do you count out the drawer before you start work? How do you record the cash drawer information? A lot of times policies and procedures also involve customer relations. How do you greet customers? How do you answer the phone? Do you have to use the company name? Who do you contact if an issue with a customer comes up? When does the manager have to get involved? Policies and procedures also cover equipment operations. So in the case of a cashier, say at a convenience store, how do you stock and maintain the food areas, the coolers? How do you run some of the equipment? Do you have to, change out a fuse on a gas pump, something like that? Additionally, you could have end of shift requirements as well. How do you reconcile this cash drawer, cash, credit card transactions, etc.? How do you lock up the business? Those are things that would be involved in a policies and procedures document regarding a specific position. So, how is a policy and or procedure created? If you don't already have something in place for a job, here's how you get something going. You'd want to look at specifically what an employee actually does in their job. You'd want to tie the activities that they perform to the job description. The policies and procedures should relate to the main functions of the job. They are also much more extensive than a job description. A job description is going to be a starting point. If you want to have specific information on how to perform tasks to run your business for employees, then you're going to look at the policies and procedures information. Again, looking at the cashier example, it could be something like uniforms, parking, workstation, how you greet customers, things along those lines. And as the employer or as a member of management, when you're putting together something relating to a policy or a procedure, you want to get input from the employees on what they actually do. You might have a senior person that's very efficient in their job. You might want to use them as an example. You might want to get some input from them. Your policies and procedures can also evolve and be updated over time. So it's kind of an ongoing process. If a new piece of equipment comes in, or you discover through one of, again, your senior people who's very good at their job, a more efficient way of doing something, the policy and procedure information can be updated. And then lastly, you want to make sure that once your policy and procedure is developed, that you make that information available to the employees who need it. Not every employee will need every policy and procedure, but if you've got specific information on certain jobs, you want to make sure that the people who work those jobs have that information. Okay, let's go back to safety information. So this, again, as we spoke about earlier, could be a gray area, maybe a policy and procedure, maybe not a policy and procedure, but it's worth looking at in a little bit more detail. So some employers do include safety information in their policies and procedures. We would see that more often with low risk environments, maybe an office setting, where you do put in some general safety information, or maybe get into some specifics, like if there's severe weather, gather at the lowest level stairwell, something like that. That's where you might have, again, in a lower risk work environment, you may have policies and procedures that cover safety. Other times, however, employers might use a standalone safety manual, and the document will be called a safety manual. That would be used in a higher risk industry, like maybe construction. Transportation is another high risk industry. Energy is another high risk area. So they may have a standalone safety manual. In addition, depending on the industry, you may have, as an employer, some mandatory safety related policies and procedures if you're working in something that's super highly regulated. Again, transportation, construction, energy production, those sorts of things. One thing that we've always recommended when it comes to safety information is to check with your business liability insurance broker or your carrier to see if they have some safety materials for your industry. They may have a pre-made, safety manual or a safety program. Working with your insurer on safety materials or a safety program could even potentially get you a break on premium. If you're considered a safer workplace, that might mean you are less apt to have steeper premium increases because you're aware of and you're putting out safety information. It would also eliminate the need for a do-it-yourself approach to coming up with safety information. Also, an important point here on the slide is that it's definitely okay to have more than one document describing important company information for employees. So what do I mean by that? It is okay to have a policy and procedures manual that's a standalone, as we've been talking about, the who, what, when, where, why of how tasks are performed to operate your business. It's okay to have that as a standalone document. It's also okay to have a standalone safety manual separate from your policies and procedures. And you certainly want to have a standalone employee handbook that focuses, again, only on employment law information, not on policies and procedures, not on safety, only on employment law. The reason why we say this is the main thing is to not cram too much information into one place. If you've got an employee handbook or a document you call an employee handbook that's 200 pages long because you put safety and benefits and policies and procedures into it, that document is not going to serve you well. Employees are going to glaze over trying to get through one giant document. It's better to have more individual resources that are shorter in length. Again, having a policies and procedures manual, a safety manual, an employee handbook. Having one document with everything in it is less useful to you as an employer if a claim comes up, because the employee would argue, well, they gave me this huge thing, but no reasonable person would read this. You're in a way better position if you've got smaller, more concise, more focused documents that employees have to look at. Again, it could be a safety manual, policies and procedures manual, and then an employee handbook. So how can we help you with your policies and procedures? Well, as a starting point, just as an FYI, we don't here draft policies and procedures because those need to be done by the employer. The employer knows the details of what's needed for their business. They know the details of the daily tasks within a job. So we don't draft those because we are not at your workplace performing those tasks. But we can look over your policies and procedures that you've put together to make sure they comply with applicable law. You don't want to have an issue where you've got a policy and procedure in place, you give it to your employees, and inadvertently there's language in there that shouldn't be there. That's something that we can do, is after a policy and procedure is drafted, we can take a look at it. If you're one of our clients, you can always reach out through our Ask HR portal with your questions on policies and procedures. If you're not a client, stay tuned for the next slide because we'll have some information on how to sign up. As we always like to say, remember, compliance is not optional. Please listen to what we're saying and make sure that you're on point with the materials you're providing to your employees. And we are here to help. You can contact us by email as shown. Also, there's a link to our information as well. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. We really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you all next week, and reach out in the meantime with any questions. Thank you.